Welcome everyone. Today we're having a look at my recent Inferno Leagues record. This is, as far as I'm aware, the Inferno record for not just this league, but all leagues so far. It was really fun doing it. The account took about 5 days to build, and it took about 3 days of running to get up to scratch, learn the tech, and identify differences in the main game compared to this, and try and execute it as best I could. I got a couple of other really good runs. I got a 21:04, I think it was, and I thought that was an incredible run. So for this one to shave off 20 seconds was both really lucky and had some really good execution in the early to mid waves. The late waves, a little bit chaotic. There is time to be saved. Certainly a sub 2030 could happen, but I think it would be really, really, really hard. And my supplies were beginning to dwindle. I had like 70 restores left, and I was really happy to just get the overall thing done. The RNG required is kind of crazy, as you'll see in the late parts. So I just sort of left it at this, and I'm really happy with it. In this video, we're going to have a look at sort of pretty much the over-analysis of the entire thing. I want to take you through from the start and talk about some of the actual mechanics of Inferno speedruns and how they translate into leagues. So what I'm going to start with is sort of the account overview, show you what we're working with, and then talk about the mechanics that make the run. So my weaponry, as we're going to have a look here, I've got a couple of pieces. The first one is the Drygore Blowpipe. This is a league's special item, and what it does is basically everything a regular blowpipe does, except it has +1 range, and it has no special attack bar. So it's just a regular blowpipe with a bit more range. In leagues, you have a reduction for attack speed, and that means that basically all my weapons are 2-tick, except my blowpipe, which is 1-tick. A 1-tick weapon means that if you are attacking and moving, you lose ticks. Because I can't attack on every tick and move on every tick. I can only do one or the other. And so the interesting part of the blowpipe is to maximize its effectiveness, I can't move. And therefore you'll see me occasionally using my other weapons to allow me to move, because the damage per tick, if I'm moving, is higher for those weapons. I also have a T-bow. T-bow is really good for starting waves off, and it's also really good for mages, Jads, and Zuck. So you'll see me T-bowing certain things at the start here, and then switching to blowpipe to finish them off. The chins are used a bit sparingly, and they're mostly good for finishing blobs. If I Venator a blob stack, I don't know which ones are alive or not, so if I throw a chin at the stack, that will more or less, most of the time, kill the rest of the stack. So they're like a finishing cleanup weapon. I have a dragon crossbow at the bottom left of my inventory. The purpose of this is to execute 6 nibbler waves. The dragon crossbow special attack uses 60% spec, and what it does is it sort of like deals damage around the base hit. So if I deal like 30 damage, then the hits are like 25 to 35, something like that. And so it has a really high chance of one-shotting the double nibbler stack, and this in turn saves quite a lot of time. So that's that. As far as the Justy plate, I realized quite quickly after using it that the assembler doesn't work with it, so I have to be really careful when I use it and how much I use it, and I started using it much less in the later runs. It is pure and simple a tank plate body. So if I think I'm getting low, or I need a bit of HP to survive, then I'll turn it on momentarily, and I probably use it maybe 2 or 3 waves in this, if that. The rest of my gear, I have the Arcane book, which allows me to swap spellbooks. So I am Venging in this run, trying to maximize damage from my Vengers, and I am also summoning Thralls and casting Death Charge. It's not a really big deal to use these things, but it's better than nothing. I also have one more spell on the Arceus spellbook, and that is the Vile Vigor spell, because surprisingly, even with infinite run in leagues, because we're covering so many waves so quickly, bats actually drain my run to the extent that I have to use some way to get run energy back, and so that's what that's for. The rest of the inventory, let's have a look. So I've got a bunch of food and supplies. With Banker's Note, I can just unnote them and use them. I have regular range pots, which means I need to keep my stats at 111 or 112. Dropping below there is not great, so I'm basically just non-stop using potions. As nice as it would be to have divines, figured this was just overall better. I'll explain the region choices in a little bit. And then we have the Divine Locator Orb and the Erexite Venom Sacs. The purpose of this is to try and proc Last Stand more aggressively and more reliably, and so the Locator Orb will take me down to 1 HP, and the Venom Sacs, if I want to use them, will just insta-kill me from that HP, and that procs Last Stand. Let's talk about the regions and relics real quick. This build is a Mauritania, Fremennik, and Desert build, the purpose of which for Mauritania is a Slayer Helm, and also easy access to purples in hard mode top. Basically, my source of money on this account is exclusively from TOB Alks, as opposed to Golden God. And I actually took Equilibrium on this account, which is not a mistake, and the build I was doing, it just made more sense. It was basically going to save me time in training. Funny, I know, but it ended up working really well. The issue with Equilibrium was that the plugins were not coded to work with it, and because it's XP based, and so is your hit markers, your hits, your XP, it wasn't working for a while. So we had to go get a fella who very thankfully decided to help with the plugin and managed to get it working again. But I took Equilibrium on this account anyway. Helped me about, maybe saved 1/7 of the time training skills and stuff, which is really nice. So regions were Mauritania for Slayer Helm. Desert is for Missouri, and also for the Drygore Blowpipe. You could say, well, the Drygore Blowpipe isn't as good as the Iranwin Blowpipe, the regular Blowpipe, but you also get Missouri, and you have to remember, we are basically not piping the whole time. We're also T-bowing, Venator bowing, chinning, Dragon Crossbowing. So the benefit from Missouri goes a bit beyond just the Blowpipe. And while we might get like 2 max hits on the Blowpipe, we'd be losing like 3-4 max hits on every other weapon. So that's why we took Desert over Iranwin. We also have then Fremennik, and Fremennik is just for the jewelry, and the jewelry is super powered, lots and lots of damage, nice and simple, nothing more to it. Also gives you Assembler, which does matter a lot. I ended up farming a lot of Grotesque Guardians, a little bit of Zulrah to get most of my Dragon Darts and Arrows, so that was also a nice source from those places. So that's more or less the inventory. Well, relic-wise, I think this was pretty straightforward. It was like Animal Wrangler, Friendly Forager. I'm not even sure it matters as to what the other ones are. It probably doesn't, to be honest. And the last relic, the final relic, is Last Stand. And Last Stand here is used to try and have a really fast Zuck and DPS through the healers, so I don't have to bother attacking them. You can do this without Last Stand and all that, but it just gives you a bit more reliability and a bit more instant damage at the end. Initially, I thought Guardian was going to be the play, but it turns out that Guardian isn't that effective on these kind of NPCs, purely because they're going to end up dying way before you actually have anything to do with them. If Guardian is like looking to attack a bat, for example, and I attack a bat, the Guardian is going to throw an attack out, by which time the bat's already dead. And so it was pointless to have this as an option. It might have saved a small amount of time here, but Last Stand overall saves more time later on. That's what we're going with. That's kind of how it's going to play out. And I thought Last Stand was a lot more fun and a lot more effective at offering a bit of a safety net as well. So I'm glad I picked it. I'm pretty sure it's the right choice here. I'm sure you can get good times with Guardian, but this ended up working really well, so no complaints. So that's more or less the build. Now I want to try and talk about some of the actual mechanics at play here, and there are a lot to cover. So first of all, you may notice I'm starting on a really particular tile. The purpose of this tile that I'm starting on is to allow me to have full vision of the arena and start centralized, so I have access to everything with a blowpipe as fast as possible. In addition, it allows me to see the northeast spawn on the map. And when something spawns there, I'm able to click it with a T-bow and then run across to the east and drag it into it. Starting from any other tile in the room doesn't give me either access or drag capability towards the northeast. So it's just a slightly better tile to start on for line of sights and instant maneuvering. Normally we start a bit further north, in between those 2 marked tiles, sort of in the center of the room. But you can see here, this gives me like instant access, and everything in the room can see me as much as I can see it, which also means I have access to instant off-ticks. I won't have instant access to off-ticks from rangers and mages, but the idea is that I can kill either the ranger or the mage fast enough that it doesn't matter what happens to me. And so having this accessibility is really important to have good wave starts. Now, some of the mechanics at play here are really interesting, and one of them is overkill. Overkill is used to describe 2 things for old school. One is when you're dealing so much damage to an NPC, and it's dead before you have, like, you're basically doing, let's say something is 10 HP, and I'm shooting it with like a 50 damage average weapon. I'm doing too much damage, I'm almost wasting my time. if I was shooting it with a T-bow that always kills it, I could be shooting it with a blowpipe instead. And the overkill is classed as sort of wasted damage, wasted potential. And and that doesn't matter too much for this run. We don't really care about that. What we do care about is overkill as it means to speed up the death animation of an NPC. And what happens is, if I attack an NPC and another hit splat is going to land, that means that as long as that hit splat, the second hit splat lands, before it dies, it will speed up the death animation. And in a lot of these waves, there are two components to this. The first is that the last NPC on every wave should be overkilled, such that I'm speeding up the whole wave. And the second component is that different NPCs die at different times. If I shoot this major up there, the major dies very fast, the blob dies slightly slower, the mini blobs die at the same time except for the melee mini blob, which dies even slower for some reason. And then things like the bats and the ranger die decently fast, the ranger's a bit slower than the bat. And then the melee dies really slowly. So on waves like this, for example, you'll notice that I'm killing the melee first because it takes such a long time to die. And if you see this part here, that they die together, those red outlines, they died together. And that's the ending part of the wave. And even though I killed the melee first, they die together. So the order of killing NPCs matters a lot, and in particular, melees need to die first. Here again, you can see like they both died together, even though I killed the melee first. If you watch out for this during the run, you'll see that it matters a huge amount that I have correct kill order for different NPCs. And so here, with two bats and a melee, I have to focus the melee first, and then I go after the bats, and then I overkill the second bat, and you see the melee and the bat dies together. I killed two NPCs after the melee died, and it still died together. And if I didn't do that, if I killed the bats first, I would have lost 3 ticks on that wave alone. So being mindful of how you're going about killing stuff matters a lot. There are other components to this, such as blobs dying, because when blobs die, before they spawn the mini blobs, there is time available to you to work with. So every time a blob dies, I can do 3 T-bow hits before I attack the mini blobs, and it's more like 5 ticks worth of time. And so you'll see here, as I run over and attack this blob, it's dead now, and I get 1 T-bow, and then a couple of pipes, and then I get to attack the mini blobs after that. Not the cleanest execution, but it's okay. And so I have to be mindful that blobs must die at some point in the mid-wave. If they die at the end, I'm wasting time that I could be using to attack things while they're dying. So this is just another component we have to look at. So we go after the blob first, and then we clean up the rest of the NPCs after that. There are even more things at play. For example, when an NPC dies while it's moving towards you, it will continue to move after it dies and waste time, and it will try and execute that before it starts dying. So you must always keep the last NPC that dies stationary. And if you don't, you're going to lose time on that. So a lot of times, not so important for these waves as we get a bit further into the run, but certainly for the earlier waves with like single melees, it's actually important to go and stand next to the melees so that they don't move while they're dying. And this is true for every NPC, although for melees, again, they're like sort of the worst offenders here. So we try and get rid of them quickly and prevent them from running over. If I went over to the major, killed it, and then started killing melees, they would probably drag towards me as they died. And it would be something like a 3 or 4 second loss per wave if I did that. As we're getting to some of these later waves here, you notice that I don't really care about the ranger damage. And this is because I do have damage reduction from my relics. And I also have the T6 range. I can just nuke the major. And I've got last stand to back me up if I really need to. Occasionally I might eat a Karambram mid-wave, which does lose time, but sometimes staying alive is just a bit more important. A lot of the late wave, like end of wave inventory management is kind of crazy, and I'm just like spamming to get my Karamrams out, making sure that I have ample supplies to deal with each wave. Although that's not really like a mechanic, that's just a necessary thing you have to do. So that more or less covers the base mechanics of what we're working with here. We've got to be mindful of NPC kill order, killing blobs early, killing melees first, making sure to stack an extra hit on the final NPC that I'm dealing with, and that's about it. And of course, we have to kill majors early in the wave, otherwise they're going to respawn NPCs. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff to work with, and if I fail to execute any of this, it's at least a tick loss minimum. Worst case scenario, we're talking about 10 seconds loss per wave. So it can get really bad really quickly if you're not too careful. There are also little things, most notably Venetabo setups that I haven't been doing as much. And this is not just because Venetabo is not great, it's because it's really hard to work with a Venetabo because of the XP drops. For the same reason I'm using Chins to finish up on blobs, it's because of the unknown factor, and Chins hits everything. Venetabo, if I was to Veneto this blob and this bat here, I wouldn't really know which ones were dead. And because Pipes kills stuff so fast, it's a lot more awkward to try and deal with the Venetabo outcome than it is to simply pipe stuff down. There are even some things that might be slightly better, end up being worse in practical senses. So with all this in mind, let's actually jump back now to wave 1 and do some serious wave breakdown for some of these waves to show you what it's like as I'm sort of thinking through the waves, and I'll break down my thought process a little bit as we go through. So I know that was a crazy introduction into what's going on here, and it doesn't really matter too much how much of that you remember, because I'll talk it through wave by wave as we go as well. So I think out here I was just getting some more special attack energy before starting. Move forward a little bit. So at this first point here, what I'm looking for is a 43 XP drop, and that means the nibblers are dead. So I see 42, and then I go after the bat, and then I know that because of the 42 XP drop, I have to return to the nibbler, and my goal here is to overkill the nibbler, because this is the last NPC on the wave. So instead of overkilling the bat, I adjust my attack towards the nibbler, and then I stay on the nibbler even after it's dead, and this dart is coming through even though it's red, meaning that I'm overkilling this nibbler. The outcome of this is that this nibbler dies immediately after this one, and the bat before that, so it's just in succession. Because of the nibbler before that was running forwards, this 2-tick delay from the run meant that this nibbler died after the bat. So it was the nibblers, then the bat, then this guy. And what actually happened was the bat died, then the nibbler, and then the final one. So you can see the kill order and movement and overkill in process here. Wave 2. So we see a 43 XP drop, and we immediately move towards the furthest bat. And I always try and get the furthest away NPC, because if this NPC comes towards me and dies while dragging, that means that the other NPC over here I'll have time to end up killing. I think this might be the best way of doing it, although I'm not too sure. It might be that killing this guy who is in range is better, and then letting this guy have time to slide towards might be better. I'm not too sure. But my thought process is always kill the furthest away NPC, give it time, and I think it only matters for 2 or 3 waves anyway. This bat dies, it drags a little bit, this next bat dies, and I suspect this one dies a tick earlier than this one. But we also have nibblers to account for. Let's see what happens. All dies at the same time. So there's this funny bit of gameplay where you got to be a bit conscious about how it really works in the moment, and a lot of this is not rationalized. It's just sort of my best guess, my best intuition. And so when you see stuff like this where all NPCs die together, it's really satisfying. I can explain it, but I haven't seen through this run, but you can see it in effect now. So we get the dragon crossbow out, and my goal is 86 XP, so 43 times 2, 6 nibblers. And if I get this 86 XP drop, they're all dead. If I see it, don't have to worry about it, I run back to the spot. This is now the blob wave, and my thought processes for blob waves is that I need to pop the blob to allow myself time to kill the nibblers in the intermediate time. That means that the time where the blob is dying, I'm using effectively. So instead of starting with a Venetabo on the mini blobs, on the nibblers, I'm starting with a T-bow, and my goal is to try and kill this guy immediately. So I click him, I get 28 XP, and then I immediately switch to blowpipe, and I hit him again. Unfortunately, the T-bow deals 24, and then the blowpipe deals 12. It's possible that if I min-roll, this happens. And this means that I have to attack him again with another weapon. In this case, I think I Venetaboed him, which is completely fine. Because in this time where the blob is dying, it may seem like the Venibow is a wasted tick instead of piping it, but I can use it on the nibblers instead, and as long as these guys die before this guy starts to let me attack him, it's okay. So this guy dies, the thrall overkills him. What I should personally be doing is piping to overkill, but in this case the thrall made up for it. And now I go for these guys, 43 XP drop, and that means they're all dead. Now I path very specifically in and towards, and I try and go for another hit. I hit a 52, so I switch to my chins, Unfortunately, I wasn't quite in spot, but it didn't matter anyway. Managed to get it off. The other thing with blobs is I want to try and make sure the melee mini blob dies first. And this is something I'm not doing amazingly well in this run. If I was to pipe the melee mini blob and then Venator the rest, that would be ideal. Depending on the melee mini blob spawn, I can also Venator it to bounce to the other two, but there are some complications. So in this wave again, I'm opting to T-bow the blob first, as opposed to Venator bowing these guys, simply because the one bat is not enough for me to deal with during the blob death animation if the nibblers were dead. I'm going for this guy early on, but as there are more targets in the room, I would end up going for the nibblers, then focusing the blob. So we end up Venatoring bowing that, and here I stay on the blob an extra tick to make sure I overkill it with the blowpipe. Now I go for the bat, and then we come back around, see a 58 XP drop. This means they're all dead, and so I'm going to switch to blowpipe and immediately go back on the bat. With a bit of misclicking, of course. I think that was maybe one tick lost from that misclick. Here we Venator bow, we see a 43 XP drop, and then we immediately T-bow the bats. This was a really nice sequence. We'll go back and have a look at this. So 43 XP, and now we have to react to where the blob is, because the blob needs to die first. So we end up T-bowing him. We path precisely and diagonally towards the blob to maximize our chances of getting in range first. If I stay on this side too much, what happens is the melee mini blob that spawns up here ends up walking across and down, which removes his ability to be clumped with the Venator bow. So I have to path left and up, which means diagonal pathing very precisely. That is this movement here. I'll go back a few frames. This kind of movement here is very precise and on purpose. It's not like a thrown out click. It's done very precisely to move me from this set of tiles to this set of tiles here. And this kind of movement is sort of underappreciated, and a lot of speedrunners who are learning don't do this. But having really precise movement matters a lot in terms of making sure you're getting to the right place as efficiently as possible. And for this run, because everything is down to the wire in terms of how much time you have to kill things, you have to be very careful to make sure you're doing the most precise actions for movement at all times. So this kind of like very precise one tile run diagonal action, you'll see a lot in this sort of thing. As well as shift clicking to make sure I move to a certain place near an NPC. So we shift click up, we get the first bat, and here I'm making sure to path not too weirdly. I want this bat to be having line of sight to me around the pillar. If I'm pathing up too aggressively, it gets trapped behind the pillar. So we have to watch the line here, or be one back, make sure it's okay. And the goal here is to kill these two and move up towards the blob, and be in Venator bow range, ideally standing next to it. So after this next guy, we path straight up and try and get next to the blob. This is to make sure that when the things die, they're not moving towards me, which again would lose time. And here we Venator bow the major because these guys are clumped. And what this does is allows me to chin the ranger, because I have the very precise kill order in mind. And so I can chin the ranger, and this would kill whatever's left over. And then we have the melee dying a tick later. I think it's possible to get the melee to die earlier, but it would require a right click on the melee, which is possible and something that I could probably incorporate. But for this run, it's really awkward to make it work, and there's so much other stuff I was trying to focus on. So maybe next league. Here we're starting with a T-bow, trying to pop both these blobs ASAP. We see a 42 there, so we are going to have to deal with that. And this movement here is quite nice. It's not amazing, but it's quite nice. And we see we probably lose one tick on the last NPC yet again. Have a look at this wave one more time. So here we're popping the far blob and then this guy. And the concept is I want to be able to move towards the far one. If I'm stuck here dealing with this guy's pop, I mean I could probably pop either in this scenario. I don't think it matters too much. The idea is as long as I can clump this, that's fine, because these ones always pull towards me, and the melee that spawns up here pulls through the ranger, which is in the center, and the major, which is down here, and he pulls over them. So it's much easier to get a clump if you're standing over here for this one than it is to get a clump for this guy if I'm standing over here. Either way, popping this one early, I'd have to move across. So it doesn't matter too much. Perhaps I could have been able to get this guy earlier if I had popped him, I don't really know. After a 58 XP drop, I immediately move. If it wasn't 58 XP, I would have stayed still to try and clump it, or whipped out the blowpipe to finish him off. but I know this is all dead, even though it doesn't look like it. So now we're moving over here. We also want to get line of sight of this nibbler. So we're moving up. We're trying to stand here to get this melee to stop moving. I should have stood here or here, where the melee is technically on this tile, and that means that he would have stopped moving and wouldn't have been able to do anything. In this case, because he moves here, I end up losing time, and even though I'm overkilling this nibbler, it's still a tick delayed. This dragon crossbow, I didn't have an opportunity to get all of them, so we have to finish him up with a venator bow or a plipe. Sometimes it happens the 6 nibbler spawn isn't humble. It is what it is. So now we're on to melees, and it's the same concept as the blob. We're going to T-bow to start here, and then pipe to finish. And what I do here is I very, very quickly switch to long range here. And this is a cool effect where I can use it to overkill all these NPCs. So if I get it off in time, it lets me fire a little bit quicker without having to get dragged in. And then because there's a travel time on there, I can end up clicking again, and the whole stack gets hit with a second shot, which overkills them all. And therefore we end with a slightly faster time dying here than here. So again, probably starting with T-bow. I should be starting with T-bow, it doesn't matter too much. And we get a really big XP drop, 77. These guys have 75 HP, so if I see this, it means it's like nearly dead. It's not quite right because of the rounding stuff. And then I got to deal with the blowpipe to finish. So I'm not just going to attack it once here, I'm going to hold onto the melee to attack it one more time. There's the XP drop, it's just a 1 this time. And this means that that is getting overkilled with the 1 XP drop. And now I can go for the bat. If I rushed the melee there, what would happen was, even though the bat dies first and the melee dies later, this would end up dying an extra tick later. So the overkill on the melee there is really important. 43 XP onto the melee. And what I'm going to do now is not overkill it because there are 2 NPCs. So in contrast to last run, as soon as I see this go red, I immediately turn and run and try and hit this bat instead. I'm hitting the faraway bat for the same reason as that earlier wave, and then we're overkilling on this guy. And the effect is that they end up dying all at the same time. One thing about moving off an NPC to the others, like let's say I was fighting the melee here, and there are 2 bats, one reason for not overkilling this, even though it might save time if these died immediately, is because I can noodle on bats. And so because I can noodle on bats, it's always better to try and move off them early. And you'll see this in later waves with rangers and bats. What I'll do is I'll always try and kill the ranger, and after the ranger dies, if it's alone, I'll overkill the ranger. If there's 2 bats, I'll never overkill it. Same principle. Next wave now, and we're going to go immediately to fight the blob. Notice my movement here. What I do is I step immediately across far clicking. So this movement where I'm clicking like that, this is to path me east to this tile where my mouse is now. The purpose of this is to give me better line of sight. Our regular start tile down here does not give me line of sight to this blob, and if I was to start on my standard major start tile for the regular runs, this dragging across this tile here has line of sight to the blob, but if I was to move 2 tiles east to this tile where my mouse is now, this doesn't have line of sight because Jagex. And so having to start up here and then come across is the only way to do it. It's a bit funny, and this is just a bit of League's tech that I had to work on to make sure it was had line of sight. We T-bowed the melee there, and the idea was simply to make sure that I had maneuverability to get closer to these guys. Ideally, finishing on this guy, finishing on the melee is not ideal, but just ended up being what it is. So here, 43 XP, and now we got to go towards the blob. We end up T-bowing him, and the reason for the T-bow is to maneuver closer yet again. And now we're going to start piping everything and finishing with a venator bow. The melee must die. So there, the melee dies, and I see 48 XP, which means these guys are not dead. Now what I want to do is kill the melee first, and then it doesn't matter between these 2 which dies. These guys have the same death timer. So as long as I overkill the remaining one, should be fine. The melee dies, and then I alternate to make sure that if I'm a bit late, I'm not going to overkill it. And then I go back, and then we overkill the bat, and these guys should die together. There we go. Here we need to kill the blob first. We're just killing a faraway bat to give myself time to maneuver closer to the blob. And now ideally I want this melee to die, but I didn't linger on him long enough. I do send the venator bow and then overkill on the major there. So we lose a bit of time maybe to the melee. Some improvements to be had. Here, we're getting into the more interesting waves. We're trying to T-bow these guys to maneuver closer. Going to T-bow the melee. And notice that I moved down here. The purpose of this down movement is to make sure this melee mini is also following towards the other minis so that I can Venator them together. And now my immediate click is after the 57 to move up towards these guys to Venator bow. Because even though I want the melee to die, I value the clump for these guys a bit more. So my immediate move is to go and hit the melee a couple of times, and then Venator bow up there. I have to Venator bow the melee because I'm not in distance of these guys. This looks a lot more complex than it might initially be. And this is a bit of luck as to which one gets targeted. And now I need the melee to die first. So we try and go for him, and then we overkill the final NPC. All three die together, really nice. 2 melee spawns, so we're going to pipe finish these guys. I think I lost a tick there. And here I end up losing a bunch of ticks because I ran over the melee. If you run over the NPC, it will try and move out from underneath you. And if you do this as it dies, it will wiggle like that, and this will cause it to lose time in the process as it dies. And so I end up losing 1 tick, 2 tick, 3 ticks to that. And you can see how bad movement is when it's dying, especially a melee. Here I hit an 85 XP drop, which means there's 1 left, so I get the blowpipe out, or the Venator bow out, and finish him up. Because the NPC got to the pillar and stopped moving, this actually dies a bit faster, so it's not too bad. And it's only 1 tick loss, even though I took 2 ticks to, like, end up going for it. Now in these next waves here, we're going to start entering with Ranger. So we're going to be using T-bow to maneuver closer, and then finishing with blowpipe. Blowpipe is much better DPS than T-bow. And even though there's travel time delay on the NPC dying, it's much better for me to pipe than to go and stand next to it. So we're often just T-bowing once or twice to get into range, and then I'm overkilling the Ranger and moving on the bat here. Because the bat was moving, died a bit later, just unfortunate, hard to do much about this. So 43 XP, and now we're maneuvering towards the Ranger. Trying to kill this bat because it was in a bit of a funny position. I probably should have just ended up committing to the Ranger, and you can see I lost a tick on the Ranger dying there. Here we need the blob to die first, so we T-bow, and then we're going to go over here and pipe, Venatoring the back one, and then killing the melee mini blob. I'm not certain whether it matters whether I kill the melee mini blob or the Ranger first. I think it's probably about the same. It might actually be in favor of the mini blob. So here we Venator, going after all these things, trying to clean up, and because I can't move when I'm piping, I have to deal with this 1 split melee mini blob. Again, nothing I can do about it. Hard to run over there in any due time. Here, got to focus the blob. We move towards it. Going to try and get the bats. Going to move towards it for the Venibow, 58 XP. And then I don't think we even lose any ticks on that way over there. I do Venibow it, but it hit decently, and then we finish the pipe. So these waves are often about trying to maneuver towards the blob as the primary thing that's going on here. So we're T-bowing here to try and execute both of them and release the minions. And then here, even though the melee mini blob is slightly out of it, it's close enough that I can bounce it off the melee mini blob. So if I was to bounce it off the Major or the Ranger, it wouldn't quite connect. If I hit the melee mini blob, what it does is it chains down. So I have to change my targeting here from being on... See this bounce? I have to change my targeting a little bit from being on the melee, the mage minion, to being on the melee minion. And it only matters for a couple of things. Here, Venibowing that melee isn't too bad. There's a couple of times where just like, if I have a particular weapon out, or I'm trying to maneuver around the room, sometimes just hitting the NPC with whatever I have is better than not hitting it at all. And so even though it's technical tick loss, it's not too bad. Here we got to kill the melee first, and I often use 1 or 2 T-bows to make this happen. In this case, what I did was I think I finished with pipe. So I did 1 T-bow, and then 2 T-bow, and then I got my pipe out, and I watched it until it went red. In the time when I was watching it to go red, I already prepared my T-bow, and immediately switched over here. So it's hard to see unless you're following it, trying to track it, but this kind of preparation is part of the run in terms of making sure I'm not like losing ticks to weapon attack speed. So in slow motion, what's happening here? I get my 1 T-bow on the melee after, so like I 43 XP this, and then here we T-bow the melee, and then we start piping. And already my mouse, as soon as I see the red, my mouse is already over the T-bow. And so the second it goes red, we've already clicked on the T-bow. It's pretty interesting to see like the timing here. But I'm not just doing this, like, I'm not reacting to the red as much as I am assuming that it's going to die on that tick, because we have like a guaranteed hit on the pipe. And so it's very likely that it dies on this next tick, not this attack, but this one. Because this is like almost in human time, so this is more like a preparation thing. So in full it looks kind of interesting when you're starting this wave. Watch it back, so we go for a 43 XP, and then a T-bow, and then switch into pipe, with maneuvering, and then straight into the T-bow and onto the Ranger. It's little things like this that probably could do with a bit more appreciation for these kind of runs, because it's hard to like get the timing and prepare for it. But when it works, it's a huge time save. So here we're killing the melee, and then we're killing the Ranger. We're going to be overkilling the Ranger, so I linger on it for an extra tick, and then I end up killing the bat, and they die together. Here we're going to be T-bowing the melee to maneuver, and then we go into blowpipe. We want to be killing the Ranger first, and we're not going to overkill it this time, because there are 2 NPCs alive, and here they end up dying together without overkill on the Ranger. Going for the mini blob here, and then finishing up, getting a T-bow off before I get the Venator bow. I have to see the XP drop is a 50, not a 58, so we transition with a couple of pipes, and then T-bow on the Ranger. So you can see this is beginning to come in together now. Like it's the same pattern for all the waves, but the interesting part is how do you react and how do you deal with it in this time frame. This is also a really interesting part here. That probably doesn't seem to make much sense. So instead of going after the blob and T-bowing it, what happens was I panic clicked right here. And that click, what this does is I know that I have to run east in order to maintain line of sight. So because I click like this, I'm getting dragged down, which breaks my line of sight to the mini blob. And so I have to end up attacking the Ranger here with the T-bow in order to maneuver east again, because if I try and attack the blob, I might get dragged down. So this is like a big correction for my line of sight. And now we can go on the mini blob, or the blob. Couple of T-bows, and then I think we're going to use one pipe, finish up over here. The XP drop for these guys is 39. So if I see a 36, I know not just that I've only killed one of them, I also know that I've killed the first one. Because the Veni bow for 2 NPCs bounces from this NPC to that one and back. And the second bounce always kills the first NPC. So in the instance that I don't hit 39 on 2 NPCs, I know to click the one that I didn't target with the Veni bow. There's a lot of little things like this that make the league run so much more interesting, because it's all conditional depending on what your XP drops hit. And you can react to this in the moment to make sure that you have time, because you got 2 ticks to do this. You got forever. And then back on the Ranger. Ideally here, I kill the Ranger after some of those minis, and this is a recurring problem that I have. Just need more time to practice to make this work, but that's how it goes. Killing as much stuff as I can here. Venibo 58, now we go back on the Ranger, no overkill on the bats, and then here, this should mean they all die together. 43 XP, let's pop the blobs. I run up to pop it, and then I immediately path out. So you'll see I path up and out, and the purpose of this is not to be like disruptive to the mini blobs. As long as they're like together, I can Venator at least one. I opt to run down to reconnect them and hit the melee while I'm doing this. And then we get a Venator bow of a 54, and then a 58, so I know that at least one of these is alive. And I need to clean the melee, and then I need to clean the melee, then these guys, then the Ranger. Alternatively, I could always kill the Ranger first before killing this guy. Again, I think it might be decent, but there are some other reasons as to why it's awkward. Here, 2 Rangers. 2 melees, rather. My initial instinct is that I want to attack this melee up here. And you can see I prepared to click on it, but the issue is I don't think I have line of sight like this. It would be pathing east, and I'm like blocked by the pillar. So I ended up hovering over this until I was further round. Melee's got to die first, and then the Ranger, of course. And at about 8 minutes, we're getting onto double Ranger. I'm preparing the T-bow. As soon as I see it die, we use one T-bow, get into range of blowpipe. And now we're on to the double nibbler before the major wave. The goal for this was to get to major before 9 minutes. So with the 85 XP drop there, the thrall actually ended up killing the last one that was alive. And we're here at just over 8:30, which was a really fast time. My average times were about 8:50 here. So you can see this is a lot faster in this run. We overkilled the major there with an extra hit. If we're not standing right next to it, we have to move towards it and do one more blowpipe hit. We're starting on this guy. I can actually end up killing the bats here because the majors have less time to die, faster death animation than any other NPC. So occasionally I'll kill some stuff before it, but ideally we want the major dead first, because at the end of the day, he is going to be the one respawning stuff. I can get away with it, and I chance it a couple of times like this to save the time, and it probably pays off a little bit. If a bat respawns, it's not a big deal. If a melee or a ranger respawns, it is a big deal. Here I want to be trying to kill the blob before the major, so that I have time to attack the major. And you see that I killed the entire major before the actual blob put out its bloblets. So again, it's like I got a chance to respawn in a couple of cases. It's not too likely. It's a 1 in 10 per attack. That's not too bad. Here, this is a bit of a mistake, and this was something I was trying to get better at. When I'm dealing with NPCs in this format, where I've got a blob down here, what I really need to be doing is staying as far away from the major as possible. In classical main game speedruns, what we do is we run towards the major, and we get behind the pillar here, and then come back out because this blob drags up. But in leagues, we don't have the time to do that because the major dies so quickly. So this reaction to move over is a main game reaction, and what I should be doing is running towards the blob as fast as I can. In this case, I think it's okay. And because we had enough time to end up killing everything, we come round and drag the melee in, and it's okay. So you'll see me do this a couple of times, and it's just because I had to relearn my reaction for what I was trying to do. And here again, I'm running towards the major, and my brain kicks in, and I'm like, wait, I shouldn't be here. I should be moving up towards the blob. And you see this happen a lot of wave starts. It's not something I can really control. It's just ingrained at this point. 53, and what I should be doing here is chinning there, and I should always be chinning this guy. So that was just a straight up mistake. Here on the major, what I want to be doing is, again, running towards these blobs. And now I'm running east to pull this guy closer as I get towards this guy. Now we're going to run down and go for the Veni. Not a great one, so I recorrect onto the melee, hit that one, and then we're going to clean up. Not perfect, but okay. If this guy was stuck over there, it'd be even harder, though. So here, of course, we've got to make sure to kill the melee. So I can transition with some T-bows on whatever NPC I want, but I got to finish up by killing the melee first. That's the drag that I was talking about. If I move down when I path, if I click down like that, and then I click this guy, I get dragged in, losing time. And you can see I don't have line of sight because I'm getting dragged, and also he's getting dragged. Like that. So we lose a tick every time that happens, and ideally we just don't let it happen in the first place. Here I think the melee hitbox dies, and so the bat drags down. This actually loses time, quite a lot of time. This is one of those things that if I was being a bit more careful, I would move towards the bat. My assumption was that the bat would die, but it just didn't. So here we've got a melee trapped on the pillar. Major dies, now melee has to die. This again is one of those Venator bowable setups, but we don't want to do it in case we're not sure what dies. The Venator will tend to mark things as dead when they're not actually dead, or the plugin will. Here again, I'm running towards the major. I should be running towards the blob. We try and recorrect, and then we're going to try kill the melee while pathing up. And you get a 53 here, so now I'm going to pipe to finish. That pipe there is just a pure guess as to which one is alive, and it's a 50-50. 42 XP means I've got an alive one. In this case, I'm probably going to end up just T-bowing the nibbler as I transition across. So instead of piping it, I just got to stay down here to make sure the nibblers clump, the mini blobs clump, so I don't have too much choice here. Killing the melee one first, and then the range one saves us time. These waves are beginning to get complex. We're going to see some of the ranger major soon. You may also notice I'm not flicking prayers in these, very rarely. and I'll just do it once or twice to catch things, but for most of the entire run, I'm just sitting on either Mage Prey or Range Prey. The most I'll do is actually flick the blobs that are off tick, but it's partially too much effort to try and focus on flicking prayers because there's so much more to do to time save. And it's also that because I have Last Stand to back me up, it makes no real difference anyway whether or not I survive in these waves. As even if Last Stand actually does proc, what happens is it gives me a 114 range boost instead of 112. So it's actually beneficial to proc it in the waves in some places. It's just really hard to remember where to do it and have like the frame of mind to make sure that I've got good timing for it. The actual damage increase from the Last Stand immediate boost is somewhat significant, but I don't think it saves more than 4 or 5 seconds. Or not even that, like maybe like 4 or 5 seconds throughout the entire run if you proc it, let's say 3 times. Because NPCs die so quickly anyway, it makes almost no difference. But for sure there are certain things like that which I could improve on the run. Here, killing the Major first, transitioning to the Ranger. Even though the Ranger has a longer time to kill, longer death animation, I don't want that thing respawning. That would be the worst case scenario. $42 XP. A lot of the time with 42 XP, I'll leave it for the Thrall and see what happens. And in that case, Thrall decided to clean up, so it's all good. A lot of this part of this is like frantic inventory management, trying to get as many parts out as possible. And here we're transitioning towards the largest NPC, which is the Ranger. And we're trying to get in range of blood piping. I didn't quite do it too well, but that's okay. What I need to do here is really stay in a decent spot with the blob and the Ranger. I want to be close enough that I can basically kill the blob and then end up T-bowing the Ranger here. This is what we call conditioning for the main game. This isn't really a thing for leagues, but the idea is if I want to clump the blob, but I need to be like, I need to kill the Ranger in the downtime, and then not have to transition back over, I can get the Ranger low enough, pop the blob, and then kill the Ranger with the remaining HP, and that works really well. We're approaching Ranger Major melee now. Staying close by the blob here, keeping the bats alive to use while the blob dies. So we go after blob, kill the bats, move in, 1 Venerable, T-bow up. Gonna T-bow twice, I think. Oh, it was just once. Sometimes I do it twice there if I'm not sure about the distance. This is okay. And then we have to spam eat Micro Ram. So I opted to go for the pipe here and then transition with the T-bow, which is a 1-tick loss moving across, as opposed to sort of going for the blobs first. Here we're trying to be a bit careful with pathing. I think we should really finish up with blood pipe there. Some of these awkward waves, I'm never like 100% sure if that's the right course of action, but if it's close enough, it's close enough. Killing the Major first hit, and then going after the melee. I opted to switch to pipe there. So if the Major, like T-bow is better on the Major, but if it's 1 HP or like very low HP, the pipe has a higher chance of killing it within that 1 tick, and even if it took 2 ticks, that's okay. So for most NPCs that you would be wanting to T-bow, it's better to pipe for low HPs. The higher your blowpipe damage, of course, the more you can get away with it. And because it's so high on leagues, I can probably pipe from this HP on this Major, and that's really effective. And it's sort of like this chance if you hit high to save a tick, and if you don't hit high, then it's not a tick loss. So playing for... it doesn't really make too much difference, but it could be a tick save. So here we actually are using the pillar. I don't use pillars much in this run, but the idea is because there's so much HP available up here, I can use the time that the HP generates for me to maneuver effectively. So if there was only a Major up there, I couldn't get away with it. Because there's a Major, a melee, and 2 bats, I can do that. Here I want to stay kind of like up in the room. I want to transition towards that blob. I hide from the Ranger there, just to make sure I don't get hit. And then we're going to go Venerable and swap. Again here, I'm not sure whether killing the Ranger and then the Mini is better, perhaps. Probably something to look at again for next league. Gut instinct here is to go for the Major, and then work towards the blob. And I think this is the one place during the waves I actually proc Last Stand. which is never a bad thing to do. And you can see this gives me a bit more damage, and it boosts my stats to 114 for range, which is quite nice. And now I have to be a bit careful, because in these late waves, I don't have access to last stand for 3 minutes. If I die again, the run is over. I'm going to be a little bit careful about how I'm playing this out. We're transitioning with T-Bow on the blob, and then finishing with Blowpipe. We do one more T-Bow to maneuver back down, and this allows me to get into a position where the melee mini blob is clumped, and then back on the Ranger. Here we go immediately for the Major, trying to draw things up with the clump. And this is now pretty straightforward. One thing I want to do here is click the blob before that mini. I need something to kill in the downtime. In hindsight, that's kind of a wave where I should leave the melee alive. And that was one of those chin executions, which I should be doing a bit more. Chinning on the Ranger at the back just makes a bit more sense. Getting close to Jad now. So we're transitioning up. I can tank a few hits as well. It's like, these hits don't matter too much. It may look like I'm tanking a lot, and I am. But if I was to get low, then I would end up clicking Karambwam, so it's not too scary. But between the range healing, the damage reduction, the defense that I already have from the rings, I am pretty tanky as it stands out. This is the one wave where I use the Justy body in this scenario, and it's because the double rangers have a chance to stack me out. But with only one attacking me, it's not too big a deal. I think I lost a tick here in the T-Bow, and probably even more dragging across there. That's just another example of the sort of janky line of sight. But we are into double majors at just over 19 minutes. So from this point onwards, I want to say my RNG was like nearly perfect. It's as good as it could be in practice. Obviously, in theory, you can just max it repeatedly, but it's just not realistic. But the pace of my Jads and my Zuck were so incredibly good compared to other runs. And you have to have RNG because the Jads can tick heal you. If you attack on the wrong ticks, Jad healers can cause him to tick eat. And so you can just be stuck there in a never-ending cycle. I don't know what the right cycle is to generate it. And at the end of the day, this is just like all luck. Now, the way I'm moving these Jads is that I'm moving in and out, trying to get within range so that my T-Bow travel time is reduced, while also being a nuisance and blocking healers. So I'm moving out and then in, and this causes my T-Bow to effectively gain a tick of travel time, which means I get a bit of an advantage over healers. Those triple Jads were insanely good, and then we're going to be using the Locator Orb to get down a bit of HP here. The goal is that on the first Zuck hit, it kills me, triggering last stand, and that means that I get a really big damage boost going forwards. The league's rec is literally 2040, so I have 15 seconds to kill Zuck from now. And now we're down to 10 seconds to kill Zuck. And here T-Bow hits 189, 189, 120, 128, 112, and he's dead. So I know those Jads and Zuck just flew by, but that really is how it goes. Let's watch Zuck one more time. I'm making sure 112 potted here. They got Venge up as well. And I can't stress how good this Zuck RNG was. 15 second Zuck kills are not unheard of, especially with the last stand buffs, but they are not likely at all. My average was like 20 seconds. So between the triples, that was also incredibly good. This whole set of triples died so fast. And this, of course, is just RNG take the wheel. There's not much skill here, really. It's just click stuff. Other than moving in between the Jads properly, getting into range. But I got very lucky that both of these Jads died in 5 attacks, I think it was. And then the other Jad here, this one died in 7 attacks. I don't think I had many sets of Jads like this during the runs. I probably did about 20 odd KC during this to try and get better, and maybe something like 20 odd KC. So in that 20 KC, this was by far the fastest Jads and Zuck that I had seen, which is quite interesting. So alongside a good entry time, getting like the God RNG on Zuck as well, super hard to do. But yeah, I think we're more or less at the end of the run, so let's enjoy this one more time. Thanks for watching if you made it this far. I know this kind of video can be a bit mentally, like a bit of mental fuckery. It's just how it is, I guess. But I thought it was a fun enough run, and it was like interesting enough to me to want to spend like 3 full days just grinding it out, learning the tech. So glad I got to share a little bit of it at least. But yeah, this is like League's rec as far as I'm aware by about 3 seconds. So not just for this not just for this league, but for like all the leagues. Kind of cool. And of course, maybe next year if there's another league, we'll try and break it if the power level is there. If not, we'll just do our main stuff and mess around, I think. But yeah, pretty fun stuff. If you hadn't seen, well, if you want to watch the full run in all its glory, I'm going to upload it just as it is. And I've also got a video for the 100-man CM that we did a while back, which will be up very soon. So yeah, very fun stuff. This account is now retired, I think, along with my main account. Not really doing anything on leagues, to be honest. Both of them have like 30k points just chilling. Not really interested in dragging trophies, so yeah, there we are. But I'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care. Thanks for watching.